Well, I'm Dr. Gina Stewart, Gina M. Stewart, and I have the privilege today of serving as the guest host of the African American Preaching Legacy Series. So today, you get to be in the chair, and we get a chance to talk to you and interview you and share a conversation with you. So we're glad that we're going to get a chance to hear from you today.
Well, thank you for being willing to do it, and I'm open and excited that we could get it done.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
My name is Frank A. Thomas. I am the director of the PhD program at African American Preaching and Sacred Rhetoric. I am the son of Almetha Thomas and John Frank Thomas. I have been a pastor for 31 years of my life. I pastored two wonderful congregations, New Faith Baptist Church and Mississippi Boulevard Christian Church. I have a wonderful family. My wife, we've been married now 41 years. Her name is Joyce Scott Thomas. We have two children, Anthony William and Rachel Sojourner, and we are now the proud grandparents of our very first grandchild to my daughter Rachel and husband Milton Dickerson, and the baby's name is August Elise Dickerson, and so I just completed my grandparent training.
Did you pass with flying colors?
What? Magna cum laude,
Summa.
Just by the grace of God, I got out of that. So they put me through training to make sure I was ready, right? But I'm legal now, and really,
that's great.
Just have been blessed to have that child in our life, and it's an amazing. People talk about it all the time.
Yes.
But it's an amazing experience.
Yes.
And so I write, I publish a couple books and things. But mostly, I'm just, a servant, a person who really tries to serve God and with faithfulness, with love, compassion for people, with integrity and mercy.
Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit about, I know you say you've been preaching for a number of years. Tell us about your call and your preaching journey.
I have no one in my family, my immediate family, is a preacher. I was the first one to be a preacher. So I really didn't have a model. I sometimes envy people whose parents were preachers, father or mother were preachers, and they grew up hearing preaching and seeing preaching and grew up in church. So my mother put us in Catholic school, and then when I was in 8th grade, I went out of Catholic school very early into public school for 6-7 years, and then she put us into a Lutheran school. I went to a Lutheran high school, Luther High School South in Chicago, and in those classes, you have religion class. Mm-hmm. And I joined a Lutheran church, Timothy Lutheran Church on 83rd and Paulina, and so I was active, and there was an African American congregation called Faith Lutheran Church. I was confirmed there. And I didn't have any acclamations for ministry. I was just trying to follow God. I went to college at University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana, and I joined a Lutheran church and a ministry there. And the head of the church, the pastor, kept saying to me as I was graduating, "You should go to seminary," and wanted to get me to go to a Lutheran seminary, short notice, in St. Louis. I couldn't see it. I couldn't, all I knew was I love religion. Every religion class I ever took, I got an A. I don't care. High school, we had a history of religions class at University of Illinois Champaign. And there had to be 250 people in that class. I set the curve for that class.
Wow.
So, as it would be, I graduated, and by this time, Joyce was a member of a United Methodist Church in our neighborhood that I became a member of, and how I did was that you only could play basketball on Tuesday and Thursday if you went to Sunday school. They took the Sunday school list and took it to the door of the church. So when you come in, kids come in and play. I just want to come in and play basketball. That's what you ain't on the list. Well, what list do you need to be on? Sunday school. So I started going to Sunday school there. Right. And I was at that early age where I was enjoying it, but you couldn't let all. I'm just here, You put the front up, and I'm just here, But it was melting my heart. I got my first Bible. She taught me Miss Monroe taught me for God so loved the world. I mean, I ate it alive, and she happened to be a white woman who was just teaching black kids, older white woman, and I think that has at least, if not eviscerated. Racism in church, it opened me up that everybody can serve God. That this white woman, she was old, taught me Sunday school. I mean, gave me my first Bible. I mean, it really taught me, and it anchored. So I graduated from college and went home to the church. And they were celebrating, those times. You graduated, it's a wonderful thing. And the Men's Day speaker canceled at the last minute. Pastor called me up. Pastor Gesselberry called me up and said, the speaker has canceled. This is Thursday. We need a speaker for Sunday. And you graduated, and we want you to be the speaker for Sunday. And I said yes before I knew it. Something came out of yes. I didn't know, right?
Okay.
So I put my little message together. It was long. I mean, I covered Genesis to Revelations. So the mother of the church said, "You were good, but you were long." Right? So I've always kept that. You were good. You covered everything. You were good, but you're long.
Couldn't tell it all.
It's just quick. I was on my way to, I was going to study the history of religions. I was going to do a PhD in the history of religions. I was going to go to the University of North Carolina. And I just got married, and Joyce didn't want to leave yet. She was, we were kind of worked through it. So the pastor said, "Well, I can take you over here to the seminary, Chicago Theological Seminary." I went there and just started to study and fell in love with it. And I had a class, and then I'll shorten this because it's far too long. I had a class, I did a paper. It was at Catholic Theological Union. I was the only, this seminary was in 7 seminary schools were in Hyde Park, Chicago. So you could take classes at one end and apply to your same degree to your home school. I was the only Catholic, I was the only African American in the room. And the teacher said, "I want to see a Frank Thomas." And I was like, oh God, no. Panic City. I mean, like. So he said, "Can you do it after class?" And I'm like, "No." And I could, but I can't get organized. So next week I went in, and Catholics, they set ambiance. Oh, they set it up. It was just the light was down, the chair was comfortable. I mean, God was in that place. He said to me, "What are you going to do with yourself?" I said, "I'm on my way to teach history of religion." He said, "You going to be a teacher?" I said, "Yes." He said, "You have a heart for people."
Wow.
The way you treated this, "Let justice roll down like waters" text, you have the heart of a pastor. And I said, "But no, you misunderstand. Church people are crazy." "What do you mean?" "I'm going to teach." He said, and an opportunity opened up. So my call came kind of circumstance. I didn't have a voice or angels speaking to me. It's just the circumstances God orchestrated to get me in the right place. So when I got to seminary, I could barely acknowledge a call. When I got to class, I could barely acknowledge to be a pastor. So it's been kind of incremental. I just kept saying, if you keep saying yes to God, you get there. So God kept presenting God's self, and I kept saying yes. And so that's really how I got there. And then I went out and became the pastor. They invited me to be the interim, and then I became the pastor of New Faith Baptist Church.
Wow. That's an interesting call story.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that.
Well, thank you. It was kind of circuitous, but it took a while.
Like the Exodus journey through the wilderness.
It really does. It took me a while.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, I was studying for the GMAT, which is I was going to take a master's in business. I was going to get an MBA.
Mm-hmm.
And I bought the book, the study manual, and I got halfway through that book, and I closed it, never to open it again.
Wow.
This is not what I'm supposed to be doing.
So tell us about your preaching mentors. Who were your preaching mentors?
Well, I told you that I didn't grow up hearing African American preaching on a regular basis per se. And the first time I really noticed African American preaching, I was a junior. I'd come home junior in college, I'd gone away to Champaign-Urbana, mm-hmm. and I came home for the summer, and one of our friends had been killed in a botched shoe store robbery. Mm-hmm. We played on a basketball team together, neighborhood, lived right back behind me in the alley, across the alley, and everything. And I was totally devastated, and we were just devastated. We went to 83rd and Damon. The pastor was Reverend L.K. Curry. And I sat there, and there was a despondency over that whole room. And he preached. And I declare when he preached, I felt better. I don't remember what he said. I can't tell you the scripture. I can't tell you the sermon title. It was a eulogy.
Right.
But when he got through, and how did he do that? I mean, how do you take a person from despair to hope? And I know it was God, and I know it was the Holy Spirit, but it was something about him and his style and the way he did it. And so that gave me a sense of wonder and mystery and hope about African American preaching, mm-hmm. especially African American preaching done well.
Right.
So that stuck in me, and from there, Jeremiah Wright was a major preaching mentor of mine. I joined Trinity in 1977, my wife and I was in seminary at the time, and I had an experience that was very painful for me in a church. I was in an internship and got thrown out of my internship. So I tell preachers, your ministry don't start till you get thrown out of your field education site.
That's serious.
Right? That's a whole nother story.
That's enough to scar you for life.
Right, it was. I was deeply scarred. So I went to Trinity just to sit in the pew. I wasn't trying to be reverend about it. I wasn't trying to. I'm trying to.
You were wounded.
Right. I was just, and so I remember he would play the organ and then leave the organ. And when service started, he'd go around and be in the pulpit. But before service started, he would just be out playing the organ. So I had no idea who he was. I mean, people talk about, you need to go to Trinity, go to Trinity, go to Trinity. And so I saw him switch from the organ. I said, oh, he can play the organ. And then he prayed the pastoral prayer. And in the pastoral prayer, he cried. I had never seen a pastor cry. Mm-hmm. And I was despondent. I was crying my own self. So that opened up a relationship. So I didn't do anything. I just sat in the back, and somebody over at the seminary told him that I was over, and I was a seminarian. And he took an interest, and one thing led to another, and we built a relationship. And he ended up installing me in 2 churches and just being my pastor for my life. I also heard Frederick G. Sampson. Mm-hmm. He was the first preacher that I ever heard to put Shakespeare in a sermon. Mm-hmm. And I was the kind of nerdy kind of type, read all that stuff. And he would come to Gordon Humphrey's church in Chicago. He would start Mother's Day night. He'd run through Friday. They were doing 6-day revivals,
right.
In those
right.
days.
Right.
And he preached a sermon called The Death of Hope. It's the road to Emmaus. What do you do when hope dies? And when that Negro finished that sermon, so I bought, there was a preacher named Sutton. He'd go to the National Baptist Convention and he would record and he'd sell tapes. I don't know how I ran into him. I bought 100 Frederick G. Sampson. I bought every Frederick G. Sampson sermon he had.
Wow.
I still have many of them still. And I just listened, and I just listened, and I said, if I ever got a church, I would ask him to come and do revival. So I loved his intellect. He was, he'd hoop at the end, but I couldn't quite do that. But I mean, I was just crazy. So I'm gonna tell you the story, finish that story, then I'll come back to another mentor. So I finally became a pastor. I became a pastor in 1982, and it was 35 people. New Faith Baptist Church is the name of the church, and we were in rented facilities, and I got to proclaim, the Lord gave me a vision, and we're going to have land in 6 months. See, if I knew what I know now, you don't ever done stuff like that. You don't do that. I believe God.
Right. And I speak prophetically.
And we got the land in 6 months.
Wow.
Right.
You heard God that day.
we got land. We got land. Got 5 acres of land. Glory to God. 5 acres.
Praise God.
So then I said, okay, y'all, feeling confident. We're going to get us a building. So it took us 5 years. In 1987, we got our very first building, and I wanted to do my very first revival. So I called up Barbara Little was her name, his secretary. And I said, I know Dr. Sampson is a very, very, very busy preacher, but would he come to a little church, I ain't got many members. I got, I got 287 members. We just getting started.
Right.
Would he come? She said, sure he'd come. Let me check with him. And so she went and checked with him. She called me back, said he'll come. I said, look, don't fool me now. Don't have you thinking this man is coming.
Right.
Right, I mean, this is my first revival, right?
Excited.
Right, don't get me excited, he ain't coming. She said, if I say he coming, right? So he came. I remember I begged the people to come. Any pastor, I begged them. This is our first revival. I said, I don't like to have revival and the house ain't full. Y'all got, please come. So I went to pick him up. In those days, you pick up the preacher.
Right.
So I went.
No
I was scared he wasn't coming. He flew southwest from Detroit, right? Some said, I know this man ain't gonna show up. I got people waiting on me. So it was like 4 o'clock. So we preached his own service, right? The plane landed at 4. We doing 6 o'clock. I think maybe 7, but then that first night, I said, he ain't coming. He is not coming. I'm gonna have to do something. He came out the plane. He preached that night, and he closed the sermon with somebody. He went to look at a car, and it was a Mercedes. And the man told him, this car will sell itself. Keep it for the weekend. He said, that's what God does. God got so much confidence in you. Keep it for the weekend.
And the church went up in
He gonna get your bag now. Keep it for the weekend. So anyway, we built just a wonderful relationship across a whole lot of time. And Howard Thurman is, I listened to a tremendous number of Howard Thurman tapes just to I like what he was doing. I liked his depth. Mm-hmm. And so those have probably served as primary. L.K. Curry, Frederick G. Sampson, Jeremiah Wright, and all of his, he's a wonderful preacher. And Howard Thurman, listen to Howard Thurman. After that, Gardner Taylor. My favorite sermon is His Own Clothes by Gardner Taylor. I listen to a lot of Fred Craddock. Mm-hmm. I love Fred Craddock's preaching. I like Prathia Hall. Mm-hmm. So those are kind of in the pantheon of who I would consider mentors in preaching.
Right. So how would you describe yourself as a preacher in terms of your preaching style? Would you say that you are expository or narrative or?
Mm-hmm. Let me back up to the Fred Sampson story and then go forward. I wrestled with my preaching style a long time and still sort of kind of do wrestle. And so Fred Sampson contracted cancer. Mm-hmm. And it went in remission and came back. And Frida, his daughter, called me on the phone and said, Frank, if you want to see him, you better come see him. So I flew to Detroit, I stayed a week. Carolyn night came because this was going to be it. Friday night, they had a celebration of his ministry, and he was putting his tie on to come, and he got sick, and they took him to the hospital. He didn't come. Right. Charles G. Adams preached that thing tonight. The whole community celebrating, you know. So I had to preach Saturday night at New Faith because we had a Saturday night service, and so I went to the hospital to see him, and I flew home, and I knew that this was the last time I was going to see him on this side. I knew that. Mm-hmm. So I said, Doc, I need to say to you a few things. Thank you, did all of that. And I said, I'm wrestling with my preaching style. I said, I'm not loud. I don't sing. I don't have a big finish. And, you know, this is like, you know, this is like this is late. I've been preaching. I started pastoring in 1982, so I'm talking about 17 years. I'm talking about like, you know, I'm just starting, I'm a pastor. I'm talking about deep into I'm still struggling. Right. Church is growing, you know, I mean, people invite me, but I'm still struggling because I can't preach like this or like that. I can't close hard, you know, I don't leave them running and shouting and all that. So when I got through with all that, he said, what for did they go out to the desert to see? And I didn't understand. He said, a man dressed in fine clothes, a reed swayed by the wind. He said, that's not what, no. He said, they go to see a prophet, and thou art a prophet indeed. He said, go home and look at that up in Luke. And I went home and looked that thing up. And so that was one of the critical moments to help me accept my style. And that's a strange thing to say 17 or 18 years in, but it is what it is. Right. Right. So I think that I'm a narrative preacher, though I am helping a PhD student out at Fuller. He did an independent study with me on contemplative preaching. And as I read his paper, we did a piece on contemplative preaching for Preaching with Sacred Fire, Martha Simmons and I, for the Anthology of African American Preaching. And I always considered myself in that category, but I did some initial work in thinking about it. But when I read his paper, I began to identify myself more and more as a contemplative preacher. And so what is a contemplative preacher? Well, I like depth. That's not that anybody else don't like depth, but you know, Howard Thurman had that depth. Sometimes you got to listen more than you can say amen, because you know, it's deeply interior. Clyde Copeland says she's an interiorist. You know, it goes deep. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's so the way that I characterize it is I'm gonna tell another story. If you know. As a part of my growing up, my father was a jazz musician, and he would play saxophone. And they had something called music -1, so it'd be a whole orchestra minus one instrument, and then he would. So I grew up underneath me, hearing jazz music, and you think a full ensemble was down there, you know. And so I could hear John Coltrane. I could hear it. And I remember I said, Dad, it sounds like noise. I can't make, it's just, yeah, this is just noise. I mean, what's the, am I missing something? So he said, Coltrane is playing ideas. And when you get old enough, you'll be able to hear the ideas behind the sound. Well, you know, you store that up. And I got married, and I was going through some old LPs that my father had. And here was Giant Steps, John Coltrane. So I got it, played it, and I heard it. I heard the ideas behind the sound.
Years later.
Years later. So my father comes to hear me preach, right? I'm in Memphis now. This is after 2000. I went to Memphis in 1999, drove down, spent some time, hear me preach. And he said to me, after hearing me, he said, "You're playing ideas." That meant the world to me. So you're playing ideas. So what I hear is ideas. I think that many preachers hear rhythm and hear cadence. I hear ideas. Now, I think ideas are deeply emotional. I don't think that.
Right.
And sometimes the emotion is not in the rhythm and the cadence, though it can be. You know, see, for me personally, I have to have my organist put me where I need to be. So when I at Mississippi Boulevard, I was, I had regular organist. He could put me there. It's hard for me to go there by myself. Some people can go there by themselves. I need no organist, right? I need no organist, right? And when you're preaching with different places, the organist don't know you, and you don't know the organist, right? So,
You're in trouble.
You're in trouble, right? So look, just stop it, right? Because I'm about to mess up. You're about to mess me up, right? So when I come down, I hear ideas. I hear deeply emotive ideas, and I transfer those ideas in some rhythm and in some cadence. I have sermons that happens, but it's with the right organist. So when I say contemplative preaching, I think that's what I mean. So I think that I am a contemplative preacher, sometimes narrative, sometimes expository, but this whole sense of quiet, and so things that are important in contemplative preaching is vocal tone, and it's important. That's everybody, but voice inflection. How do you convey emotion in your tones, in your feelings? So what happens to me is a fraction of a second before I say what I'm going to say, the emotion hits me, then the tone follows the emotion. So we don't do much work in our traditional contemplative preaching yet. This young man, his name is Trey Clark, I'm working with him, and so we hope he'll do his dissertation on contemplative preaching, hopefully a book on contemplative preaching. And we have contemplative preachers. Howard Thurman is a contemplative preacher. And he did a paper on James Massey. We have a tradition in the anthology. We label some of these people, men and women. I think it's Barbara Harris, contemplative preachers, but our tradition generally is the more demonstrative aspects of our tradition, which is okay. But I think coming up, we're going to begin to lift these contemplative preachers. So that was a long way around, but I've been thinking about that. I'm just giving you what I've been thinking about.
Right. So tell me about this preaching series. I know that you've interviewed several preachers, pastors across the country.
Including yourself.
Right, thank you. What is the genesis and the vision behind this African American preaching legacy series?
It started when I had Jeremiah Wright come here, and it dawned on me, it's crazy to have him come here and not do an interview with him. So now I got to, what questions are you going to ask him, and how are you going to approach this? And I decided that I did not want to do any questions on the whole Fox News creation about his sermons and taking them out of context and all that. I wanted people to see him as the preacher, as the pastor preacher that I knew. So I kind of shaped the questions. For example, I asked him, when was the time that you thought that God really used you mightily in preaching? And he told the story about being in Cuba and having this woman as an interpreter, and he preached 5 nights and she interpreted. And on the last night, when he opened the doors of the church, she came out of her interpreter's role, came down, and gave her life. That was for him. Now, he's been to Hampton twice, all over the place. But that, because at the heart, he's a pastor. At heart, he's ministering to people. Now, God takes the ministry and blows it up and blows us and blows you up. But at the heart of it, at the very core of it, you're just trying to do God's will. You got a little call and preach the gospel. You're not trying to become Dr. Gina Marcia Stewart. That happens.
Right.
Because God.
The grace of God.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Who you really are is a person trying to be faithful to your call.
Right.
Right. Often a pastor trying to help people and serve people. And so I kind of designed the series so that some of the people that I've known across my years of ministry, the second one was Otis Moss Jr., for example, right after Trump was elected. And he was here for the PhD program. Well, it makes sense to have Otis Moss Jr. up here and not interview him. And so we did an Otis Moss interview, and then it hit me. So much of our genius goes to the grave.
Right.
And maybe we could have an archiving role where people could just share as people. You know, we have victories, we have defeats, we have glorious preaching opportunities. And sometimes we don't know, you can be so hurt in this thing, it takes Jesus to stand you up on Sunday morning in your own church.
That's right.
Folk done hurt you.
Right.
Right?
That's right.
I've been there. I've been hurt.
Yeah.
And I got up with whatever piece of sermon I could muster. It wasn't my best piece.
Right.
But the fact that I had the audacity to stand there and still preach.
Right.
And I wanted the audience to capture a whole sense behind some of these celebrated, rightfully so, pastors and preachers, and in hopes that another pastor or another preacher or a younger preacher might be encouraged, might strengthen their own preaching, might be able to get past, people say stuff like, you don't come to little churches, do you?
Right. Yeah.
I was a little church. What are you talking about?
Right.
I ain't forgot that.
Right.
I started with 35 members.
Right.
Jeremiah Wright brought more Trinity members to my installation than I had members. They fill a place. And my little members over here, right?
Right.
So I said, my analogy for it is, we used to be a little dinghy out there in the water. These big ocean liner churches would come back. Our little dinghy.
Wave.
Right? What do you mean?
Yeah.
I come by schedule. No, I never forgot. So my hope with all of this stuff is to help people see that God has done amazing things. But we're just like every other pastor trying to be faithful.
Yeah, and there's a backstory.
It is.
That most people don't see.
Right.
I heard, I believe it was T.D. Jakes, he said once that people look at our lives like the end of a movie.
Yeah.
We come in after all of the struggle and all of the tragedy, but there's a backstory that many people don't know. And so this African American Preaching Legacy series has really been a blessing to hear the backstory of so many preachers that we admire and look up to and emulate and imitate. It's just good. So we appreciate that contribution.
Thank you.
And the contribution that the seminary is making. You mentioned earlier that one of the questions you asked Dr. Wright in his interview was when he felt the Lord really used him. What would you say, what would be your answer to that question?
I think it was at Hampton.
Here we go again.
The circumstances at Hampton are, as you have described so adequately, that it's like you receive the invitation, and the moment that you say yes, a weight goes to your shoulder. Right? And so when the new year comes in and it's publicized that you're the preacher at Hampton, it's like almost a death march. Every stop. You ready for Hampton?
Right.
No, I really wasn't thinking about Hampton. What you stopped bringing up, saying it's like a death march or something, and people are all kind of. So I had a couple comments come. Thurm James, when he heard the news, he called me. He said, "Frank, do not be fooled by Hampton. Hampton loves content, and you got content. Don't be fooled.
Right.
Hampton loves content, and you got content." As you know, Saturday night before Hampton, You know, you preach at your own church Sunday morning. I had a Saturday night service. No, I had Sunday morning service. And then you go, Monday night is the president's address, and then if you're the morning preacher, Tuesday morning you start. So I was really kind of calm. I was fairly calm, up and down, but fairly calm. Booth called me, Charles Edward Booth called me Saturday night. He says, Frank, I just wanted to tell you one thing. I said, what is it? Tell me, help me. He says that they knew who you were when they invited you.
Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord.
They didn't invite you to be anybody other
than you.
So Tuesday at Hampton, it was Tuesday morning, and I preached a sermon on Naaman. And you were in the audience.
Right.
I remember you hollering and screaming
Frank
at
Anthony.
me. I know. I know exactly. I know exactly where you and Elaine Flake was sitting. I got to, you know.
Yes, indeed.
The sermon is called "See My Change," and I had a particularly difficult time in Memphis. You know, in the pastorate. You know, we had a lawsuit. It was just. And so there, I came down in the sermon, you know, he dips in the first time, he dips in the water, and he looks at himself, no change. You know, 3 times in the water, 6 times in the water, you know, 6 times no change, you know, preaching,
right.
No change. He looked at himself, should I go down the 7th time? And he goes down the 7th time, and see my change. And it comes up out of that water, the skin like a baby, see my change. That was my testimony, see my change. And somewhere in that close, I said, like Naaman, I don't know why. The waters of Lake Michigan wasn't enough. I said, God, why do I need the waters of the muddy Mississippi? Uh-huh. I've been dipped, and I went through it one time. I came up 7 times in the muddy Mississippi River in Memphis, Tennessee. See my change. I lost it. I absolutely.
We remember that day because we thought you were going to shout, and you did have a little shout, but you were yet holding on to that iPad.
I dropped it. You know, Claude Alexander, Bishop Claude Alexander says you threw that iPad. I just lost it because
it was a great day.
It was just so real.
It was a great week, actually.
It was. It was just.
Week.
It was so real. Yeah. And the audience just went crazy, and I couldn't hear them because that was my testimony.
Yeah.
That God had to dip me in the muddy Mississippi River. I thought the waters of Lake Michigan were clear and beautiful and clean. But no, in that Mississippi River, and look at my change, look at what my life is now, look what God has done. So that was, I watch it, it's on YouTube, the sermon, and I watch it sometimes, and that is my favorite sermon. I haven't preached it probably since then. I haven't preached it since then. Yeah. But see my change, look at what God has done for me, you know. So that's my sense of it, and of course everybody makes fun of the iPad and stuff, and I said, see, if you throw your iPad under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, it don't break.
Right.
When you clown it.
Right. You have to make a trip.
Right.
To the repair shop.
So of course when I got back to the green room, as you know, the first thing I did, click on that iPad. I said, see my change. Right.
Oh, that was a great message, though.
Well, thank you, sis. Thank you.
The whole week was great.
It was.
Really great.
Yeah. Thank you for it. We did it together. You know, we went with, remember Carl Hendricks and Joan Hendricks, and we went up to Alicia Cholet's place. Right. And had some retreat time as well.
Right. Yeah, we appreciate that. That was great.
It was great. It was a great time.
And so the flip of that, the converse of that, the time that the Lord really used you, what was one of your most difficult preaching moments, challenging preaching moments?
The most difficult preaching moment, challenging, was I told you that I was a pastor and a group filed a lawsuit against me and the church leadership. And so it was done on a Monday afternoon, so I get a phone call, and there's a lawsuit down here with your name on it, with my name on it. And so we got down there and got it, and it had my name, and there were members of the church that were suing us. So it was devastating. I mean, it was absolutely devastating. Mm-hmm. And so I'm the preacher for Sunday morning. And what do I preach? I said, well, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna call Dr. Gina M Stewart and let her come over here and preach, because I can't. I mean, I was out of it. You're in shock, first of all. Mm-hmm. And then when you come out of shock, mm-hmm. you go to depression. I mean, like, we supposed to be Christians. Mm-hmm. And then it was public, which means people got copies of it and spread it. The barbershops, the newspapers, the television stations, it was everywhere. I got calls from people across the country that I ain't heard from and I don't know when, calling, wow. You all right? Yeah. We heard about it, right? So I said, well, I can't duck out and bring in a guest, so this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to preach, ye whitewashed tombs, ye workers of iniquity. We preach those sermons, and then when they say, you talking about it, I said, no, right. I ain't talking about y'all. That's right. Jesus said that.
Jesus said that. It's in red letters.
Right, in the text, right?
Right.
And so somewhere about Thursday or Friday, I can't claim credit for it. I think it really was God. The word came to me, preach what you most deeply believe about the character of God. Mm-hmm. So I tell preachers, the more trouble you're in, preach the character. What is it that you preach? The character of God. What is it? So I believe that God is a God of mercy. So when you're in a public scandal like that, it has the feel of being in school, and it's like there's going to be a fight at 3, it's going down at 3.
Right.
Right. So everybody hangs mm-hmm. around the playground waiting mm-hmm. for it to go down. People who normally go home don't go home.
They hang around.
They hang around. So this is how it was in the church. I mean, it's just like, everybody was there. They want to see what I'm going to say, what I'm going to do. Carolyn Knight flew down to be with me. Martha Simmons flew. And I gathered our little family together, my wife, my son, and my daughter. And I said, no matter what happens, we're going to hold our head up. The people don't have a right to our private pain. Mm-hmm. They don't have that right. Whatever happens. I said, we're going to get through it. So I preached that morning, our God is so full of compassion. We serve a merciful God. I preached what I believe about the character of God. It wasn't a good sermon. I wish that the structure would have been better. I wish that my clothes would have been tighter. It was a hard close, But it's an example of what I was saying, is that sometimes you stand there right. on the Word of God. And it says in season and out of season. And I wish it would have been better. I wish I could have done better, but I couldn't. But by virtue of the fact that I stood there and offered the very best, I thought God was pleased. And I went home and laid down somewhere and took refuge in my family. And so I think that was probably the most difficult preaching moment. And I've seen a lot of preachers, not just me. I saw a preacher, I was doing revival for a preacher in St. Louis, and a daughter had an aneurysm and died last night. I was waiting on him to pick me up at the hotel. Never came. Never came. He had rushed her out of the house. Next week, he preached her funeral. And she was sitting there in the casket. So when he got up and went to that pulpit, I lost it. The audacity in the face of death to still proclaim. Yeah. So I know that I'm not doing, I know there are preachers that do it a lot, but you got to find it somewhere. And there are appropriate times when you shouldn't preach, If me and my wife, for example, were splitting up. It might not be a good time to preach, or that could be things. But I had to preach that Sunday.
Right.
As the pastor, I had to, I had to stand. You know what it reminds me of? That wonderful text where Absalom has died. David is grieving. And I think one of the generals comes to him and say, you're going to grieve more for your son who betrayed you than you are for all these soldiers that have been faithful. Mm-hmm. You need to sit up in that chair. And with his heart breaking and grieving like crazy, he sits there as the king.
Wow.
And that's where I haven't preached that yet.
Yeah, but I hear a sermon.
It's coming. It's coming. You better not steal it. I know, that's what I'm saying.
Credit.
You say, you preaching Dr. Gina Stewart's sermon. I said, didn't you see me on tape?
I'll say, and I was in a conversation.
And I heard.
Somewhere I heard. But the victory oftentimes is just in showing up.
It is.
And standing.
It is.
It's not always what we say,
right.
But the fact that God gives us the grace
right.
to even stand up and say anything
right.
is the victory.
See, which also means it's not about the numbers, it's not always about the crowds, it's not about how many services, all the trappings.
That sometimes distract us.
Yep.
Yeah.
I can assure everybody listening to this tape, some Sundays, you're going to have to stand.
Right.
Let me give another example. I give another example. One. So I went to a particularly difficult church meeting, leaders meeting on a Thursday night, and I knew I couldn't preach Sunday. I was too angry. Mm-hmm. And if I'd have said anything,
yeah,
I'd have cussed some folk out right now. Just that. So I called, on staff was Eugene Gibson. I called him on a Friday and said, I can't preach Sunday, I need you to step in. He said, Doc, you gonna be there? I said, I'm gonna be there, I just can't look at the people. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna sit right on that front row and look at you. And I said, because if I turn around and look behind me, I'm gonna go berserk. And it's gonna be ugly.
Right.
And I got there, sat on that front row. He preached a marvelous word, I got some help, I got some healing. And what I also sometimes say is we need to develop a team of people around us. Mm-hmm. Because there are some circumstances where we got to stand there, and some like angry and bitter and ugly.
Right.
Then how do you cultivate people around you who can offer you a word?
Right.
And glad to do it.
Exactly.
And looking for the opportunity.
Right.
So it's kind of a both and. Sometimes you really just have to stand, but sometimes you have to stand down.
Right. And knowing when to do that is critical and crucial.
Right. And I think if you're honest with yourself and honest with God, God will show you when.
Mm-hmm. And certainly anger is probably one of those times we do need to sit.
Yeah. Pastoring people is difficult.
Yeah, it can be challenging.
Yes, it can.
To say the least.
Yep.
Yeah, 52 Sundays a year.
Right.
More than a notion.
Yep.
So, what else would you like to say, or that you'd like to conclude this conversation? What's on your heart that you'd like for our viewers to know?
That the African American preaching tradition is absolutely one of the most beautiful things in America and the world, and that we have been given this tradition. They are preachers in the 18th and 19th century. If we go back and read some of those sermons, those folks were saying something, and that we've been given this tradition. It's been given to us, so how do we preserve it? How do we take care of it? How do we archive it? How do we bequeath it? How do we treat it well? How do we respect it? How do we acknowledge that no preacher is bigger than the tradition that they come out of. As great a preacher as Martin Luther King Jr. was, he's not greater than the tradition. The tradition birthed him.
Right.
You know, we come out of the theological argument is that did God create ex nihilo or out of substance? You know that.
Right.
And we act like we're creating ex nihilo, when in fact this substance has been passed to us to shape and direct and form. And you know, I say, for example, C.L. Franklin had the eagle stirreth her nest. Well, they got versions of eagle stirreth her nest back in the 1890s. That sermon has floated in the culture all this time. Now, what he did with it was raw genius. So I'm not dismissing his genius,
right?
Because some other folks could preach that and it don't come off and sound like that.
Right.
What he did, but he added his genius to the tradition. And so, what I continue to work against is us getting up, being ignorant of the traditions that's been passed on us, passed to us. We got some stuff that's been passed on to us through generations upon generations, and if we don't honor it, preserve it, write about it, talk about it, and add our own flair and genius to it so that the next generation will take it and add theirs. And so the tradition lives and the tradition lives. And so I say that the African American preaching tradition can generate a preaching renaissance to revive American Christianity in the 21st century. And we know that American Christianity needs revival.
Yes, indeed.
And the best of African American preaching, I mean, when Prathia Hall stood up at Hampton and preached between a wilderness and a cliff. Have you heard that sermon? I need to download that to you. And she preached between she talked about.
But I have read it. I haven't heard it because I read it. It is a powerful message. I read it in the African American pulpit, as a matter of fact. Yeah. But hearing it, I'm sure.
Between a wilderness and a cliff. We do ministry, and she's talking particularly as a woman. We do ministry between the wilderness and the cliff. Talking about Jesus, he preaches, and they want to throw him off the cliff.
Right.
And Gardner Taylor steps out with his own clothes, and you know he talks that how they crucified him in his own clothes. He talks about they were being whipped and beat, and they crucified him in his own clothes, and he's coming back again.
In his own clothes.
It don't get no better than that. It don't get any better. It don't get any better.
That's the truth.
Than that. And so we have this
sheer genius.
It is sheer genius.
Sheer genius.
So Carolyn Knight will say, I thank God for making me a black preacher. I thank God for making me a preacher. Thank God for making. And we have some of the most despicable racism, hate, animus has been directed against us. But out of the midst of all that, we have created this thing with God's help of beauty, some joining of the oral traditions of West Africa with the experience of slavery to generate a tradition of hope that is
that has saved lives.
Oh my God. I tell you, you heard me say this time, I'm not a hooper, but I love hooping when it's right. And when it's right, and the preacher done says,
nothing like it.
And I like it.
Nothing like it.
It elevates. You can be at a funeral in despair, and the preacher rise. And when the preacher gets through, you got the courage at least to get to the gravesite.
That's right.
When you didn't even know if you were going to get out the car.
Right.
When you start.
Right. Let alone get to the grave.
Exactly.
To the gravesite.
But the preacher rises.
Yes, indeed.
So I just think we have this great tradition, and I'm trying to give the rest of my ministry to it, that it would be preserved, written about, and which is, of course, the genesis of some of the PhD program. But it's just a marvelous, marvelous, marvelous thing.
It is. And given that, I said that this would be the last question, but you mentioned that having this opportunity, privilege, honor to direct the first African American PhD in African American preaching and sacred rhetoric. Did you ever envision that this day would ever come? What has it been like, given now that the program is it's going into its third year, I believe. We're going into our third year.
One of the things, so the bottom line of it is, God has allowed me to be 31 years as a pastor, to take that pastoral experience with scholarship in writing, and it converges into a point for the last years of my ministry where it all makes sense. Everything I went through to come to this place. So I can handle the pastoral side. You know, I've done it, which is so important in our tradition. I'm like, how you talking about preaching? You ain't never been a pastor. Yes, I have.
Right.
I got a scholarship and a writing side. I got published books. And so what side? You can kind of converge them into this kind of role of a practitioner scholar. And so I tell people like this, that sometimes it takes to be 60 or late 50s by the time it all comes together. But if you don't start looking for it when you're 25, you won't get there. So I can look back over my entire ministry. The old folks got all kind of, I wouldn't take nothing from a journey. You know, they got all kind of ways, you know, every day with Jesus gets sweeter and sweeter. I thank God for the hills and the, you know,
through it all, I learned to trust in Jesus.
See, you helping me close.
Right.
You put me in my key.
You couldn't close.
No, you put me in my key.
Yeah, key check.
That it comes together for this moment, and I'm thankful. I am eternally grateful. And another thing that I'll say about it is you can't hold on to it long. I can't get here and not let go. So I'm 60 something. I got here, and retirement is in the front view. Yeah. So I've got to let it go. I've got to pass it on. And so when you get there, God, and I think maybe God has something else beyond this. You know, I think maybe an archiving ministry where I archive African American sermons, or do something completely different, or it's connected. But you know what I mean. I can't hold on as a director of this program. Right. By the time that I'm here now, and that's okay because I trust God. And when we birthed the vision in 2013, and so I did a series of meetings. I invited 25 homiletians in 2013 to come, and I opened up the idea. They loved it. The next year I invited 25 pastors. Joe Ratliff, Jim Wright, Walter Thomas, a bunch of presented the idea. They loved it. The third year I brought a group of pastors and homileticians together. And the question was, could I get accreditation? Joe Ratliff and I just talked about this. And I said, we didn't think that you were going to be able to get accreditation. We just didn't think it. Accreditation is a hard thing. And I said, well, God did it. God got it. And so from the program now, from the first cohort that you're in to the second cohort, God has been doing it. And so this is a strange thing, but I'm starting to get ready to let it go.
Well, Shirley Prince used to always say, vision always outlives the visionary.
All right now, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And connected to that is, it's too much work to hold on and kill it.
Right. Let it live.
So, we have, as pastors, we'll hang on and kill it.
Right. That's true.
And I love it. It's too much work, and I love it too much to do that. So I'm gonna release it. It's coming. I can't say exactly when, but it won't be long because I want to go to the beach. I want to
play with August.
Play with August. They can say, "Would you?" They're gonna tell me stuff like, "Would you turn down the ocean? We can't hear your lecture." I'm gonna lecture from the beach.
Skype me.
Me and August out here. Right. August, give me a few minutes. Let me do this. I'll be back.
It's certainly an enduring legacy.
Well, thank you.
An enduring legacy.
I was trying to serve. I just really, I mean that. I mean that.
It does not yet appear.
If something happened with this thing, it's been God, because I was just trying
It's all the glory.
to be faithful.